Yes, ladies and gentlemen, tonight, live from Arnold's Drive-In and Milwaukee Fried Chicken Stand, You Wanted to See It brings you one of the most exciting events it's ever been our privilege to bring.
Okay, kids, Arnold's is proud to present Kenosha, Wisconsin's own
TC and Jake.
Welcome, folks. This is TC Fleming here with Jake Kemp, and we have a guest this time. It's Stephen Monacelli. Stephen, welcome.
Howdy, how you doing?
We're doing well. Stephen is a journalist here. People who are big fans of the TC Fleming expanded universe.
Jeez, the more successful products as described by the Dallas Observer.
Yeah, the ones good enough to be in the Observer. Those folks who know those know that I talked to Stephen about local issues on our local politics podcast a couple months back. But now he's seen Q up close, and we want to know what it's like. When did Q walk in?
Well,
I guess is the big question.
I have a surprise for the audience. It's when I walked in. I am Q. So every time I look in the mirrors when I say Q.
This was a great idea.
That would make this our second biggest interview ever conducted in this room.
You put McAfee first?
John McAfee's got to be number one.
Yeah, I would agree.
I would agree too. But he might be a fan of mine. So
yeah, I would think, certainly an awareness. If he's not a fan, it's because he's jealous.
You know, there can only be one Q, right? But where we go one, we go all, is the saying that they really like and put all over the advertisements. So it was a trip. No, I jest. I don't think that he or they or whatever was there, but they were certainly one of the main topics of discussion at this 4-day event this past weekend.
Okay, so I want to know the story of like how you first become aware of this, because I know that when it was described by like the morning news, they didn't even mention the Q element of it at all.
Right.
It's just a conservative.
Because for the normal people in the audience, there was a big Q convention this weekend.
Yeah.
And Stephen was there.
In Dallas, right, yeah.
Right. So you'd mentioned the Dallas Observer. They were really the only ones paying any lick of attention to what this was and that it was coming. Jacob Vaughn, in particular, he's a staff writer there. He had written a series of great articles about this event coming to town in advance, and had even written about how Gillies, which was the original venue, had backed out. So I write for the Observer sometimes, and so I follow their work. And when I saw that was happening, I immediately knew what it was about. And I'd been exposed to the general QAnon phenomenon and movement well before that. There's a really great HBO series on the subject. If you're totally unfamiliar and you've got HBO Max or whatever, go check that out.
Nobody listening to this is in any way unfamiliar. We've spent dozens of episodes, I would say, over the past 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, someone recently asked for us to send our Q episode to them.
It's
I'm like, I don't know what to do
Here's
with this
the whole
request.
website.
Yeah, just listen to the
Go
podcast.
back to the last 2 to 3 years. So we don't have to do too much catch-up type stuff.
Okay,
so you don't
perfect.
have to worry about that.
Perfect. So, basically that's what alerted me to the fact that it was coming. And, to your point, Jake, some folks I don't think were either paying attention or they hadn't done their research, because that article in the Dallas Morning News, you would have no idea what this convention was if you had just read that article. And so the real thing that made me want to go was that I saw a pretty prolific QAnon critic / podcaster who's been following this and documenting it. He goes by the name Travis View. That's a pseudonym, and he runs this podcast called Q Anonymous podcast. And so he had been rejected from attending. He had bought a ticket, and they basically said, nope, sorry, you're not nice enough to us, so you can't come. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, oh, okay, well, maybe I should go because it's in my backyard. Why not? And I tried to get a press pass, but they saw that I had retweeted his post, and so they rejected me. And I've previously written for both The Observer and The Daily Beast, and both of them have folks that have covered it pretty extensively. So after that, I asked, okay, can I buy a ticket? And they said, oh, well, yeah, we'll probably not let you in. And then I made it explicit. I said, okay, so you're saying I can't come? And they said, yes. They actually said it sardonically. They said, oh, you're more perceptive in real life than on social media, which is a very ironic comment for a number of reasons. Because I ended up, having someone buy a ticket on my behalf, and then I walked in and had no issue being there for the remainder of the conference.
Yeah, I was following your tweets about this over the weekend, and I have just been tickled by your disguise that was able to so effectively dupe them. I don't want to steal your thunder, so please give us the many multi-layered, several-step process you used to get by these censors.
I shaved. And then I just kind of dressed the part. I tried to, kind of fit in, and that wasn't very hard.
The guy we're looking for has facial hair, and he doesn't, so I'm going to let him go.
See, the problem is if I were trying to do this, I would have been so taken by the idea of the disguise that I would have ended up like when the Always Sunny episode where Charlie is a cowboy, like an oil man.
Yeah.
I would have gone way too over the top.
I almost did.
Yeah.
I almost wore a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, but the person who got my ticket, they had checked it out before they handed it off, and I asked him, like, what's the vibe? What do people look like? Would I stand out if I dressed like this? And he was like, oh yeah, there's not as many people wearing cowboy hats as you might think.
Yeah.
So I just kind of, wore a blazer, and the second day I just dressed down and, tried to fit in more so with the casual vibe of most of the attendees. I was nervous because I do have pretty thick eyebrows, which you can't really do anything about that. And as one commenter posted on my tweets, I'm a journalist looking motherfuckers on the planet. And so I was
Is
nervous.
that what you tell the hairstylist? Just give me the journalist?
Give me the big J.
Well, funny enough, there are several people who are journalists in the area that all go to the same barber as I do. I've known him since high school, but he used to barber downtown, and he moved to Grapevine, and people still go out to get haircuts with him. Shouts out to Close Knit Barbershop. But I digress. Second day I wore a hat, so I guess maybe that helped. But I often wear hats like that anyway. My girlfriend was like, Steven, you basically are dressed normally, like you might normally dress. And so it was a bit of a Clark Kent kind of situation, I would say. No one knows that it's Superman, but he just fucking took off his glasses. In my case, I just put on some different glasses because I can't see without them. So that was a bit of a laugh riot. I mean, I'm not the most well-known journalist in the world, so I didn't expect them to know who I was necessarily.
But it seems like if they're promising you there's no way you'll ever get in here, then, that implies that they're going to make some effort. And whatever. It's not like being blustery. It wouldn't be the first time a Q-related thing had said things that they then didn't back up. But
yeah, it's a bit of a pattern with them, I'd say.
But as far as so when you get in, you say you kind of tried to fit the general vibe more than just your appearance. I also think I would have had a problem with this. I think I would have just been way too trying to fit in, starting conversations about adrenochrome.
Yeah, I've seen you do it. It wouldn't go.
Yeah,
boy.
Yeah, I would have been way too try hard.
I think of last July 4th weekend when we were on the lake. So this isn't the exact same kind of thing, but just every single boat that would come within shouting distance, Jake would just yell, "I love Trump too!"
Yeah, I would give a nice hell yeah, brother at the boat
I don't
parade.
think that they bought you. I don't think that any of them felt like it was a compliment.
I think you're probably right. So did you have to sort of try to feign any conversations with people that were beyond just pleasantries?
Certainly. Yeah, I didn't really try to initiate too much because I wanted to be as much of an observer, fly on the wall sort of person as I could be. But there were instances where, I'd be sitting down with some folks or, during the lunch breaks in particular, someone might sit next to me or I might sit across from someone and we just get the pleasantries, which would sometimes quickly devolve into a discussion of, the global communist cabal that's threatening the world.
Yeah. How could you talk about anything else?
Yeah, right. And so, I just really gave myself the most basic white person name possible as a backstory. I gave a vague, thing about being some sort of consultant that no one would really ask much about after I, said e-commerce. And then I just kind of went from there. I would ask people, what brought you here? What kind of speakers were you excited to see? Were there any, talking points or, narratives or anything like that they were really interested in. I wouldn't ask it necessarily in that way, as, trying to just get people to open up a bit. And they would ask me, oh, why are you here? Or who did you come to see? And I would just make sure I had someone in mind, just to be able to pull it out and then kind of turn it back around. And I'd had enough exposure to some of the, phrases and talking points and common concepts and narratives that are popular in this movement. And so I would just be able to, at the surface level, mention something and then ask them, what do you think? What about you? And that did lead to some pretty interesting conversations. It wasn't always immediately, unhinged and off the walls. A lot of these people seemed borderline normal sometimes and very friendly, pretty much across the board. I guess they assumed I was one of them.
Yeah.
But that almost makes it a little more strange that some of these people can be, just your everyday seeming kind of normal people and yet be really into a conference where people are talking about pedophilic cannibalism.
I mean, I think it speaks to like the absolute hunger and desire for a community in today's modern world. Like, I think that it's important to be around other people. It's harder and harder to do. I think it's clear that we do less of it than people did in the 50s, 60s, etc. And so, if I got to say that I believe in blood-sucking lizards to get some people to hang out with me, then fuck, dude.
Well, and there's a dynamic there, I think, that really speaks to your point, which is that a lot of these folks would say, especially the speakers, but I think it's a common thing within the movement that people will describe having lost friends or family members or even business connections, what have you, because of how fervent they are in terms of believing these things. And I think a consequence of that is that it pushes them into the arms of this movement and this community even further. But, that's kind of like how any cult works.
Yeah. It is interesting to me that like you said, you get people talking. I mean, did you know anybody previously? Like, I don't know your entire backstory, where you're from, family, where all you've lived. But I mean, I definitely know very close relatives that are pretty into this. And it doesn't take a lot to get them talking if you're receptive. But it does strike me as odd that they really they're not hesitant to share this with anybody who seems interested, but they also don't want anybody to cover their event.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things there, right? People paid $500 minimum to attend. So I think they assumed anyone who was there was kind of filtered out already. Like, true believers were there. And then the flip side of that, not wanting anyone to cover the event, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? If you take what they're saying at face value and you take it seriously, it's pretty disturbing and it's very strange. But there's this practice that you alluded to, or you could call it a tendency for people to say one thing and then not back it up, or walk it back after they start getting criticism, or discuss things privately in one way and then publicly in another way. And so I think that was part of it. They didn't necessarily want anybody inside who wouldn't write a glowing review, and who would also have access to the important context that surrounded what the speakers were saying, which would make it harder for them to then deny or walk back or feign irony when it comes to any of the things that were said. And most virally, the Flynn comment that seemingly endorsed the idea of a Myanmar-style coup already started walking that back. The next day, they literally were trying to encourage the audience to go on social media and say that he did not say that. And yet we have the video. We saw
streamed the event.
Yeah, well, that was what was bonkers to me. If they stream the event, there's this weird dynamic of, they don't want people inside, but they want to broadcast it out. I didn't even know there would be a stream ahead of time. I may have not bought a ticket otherwise. But I'm glad I was there regardless, because I got to see things that were not live streamed. And I got to interact with people in ways that I think were really valuable to understand the overall atmosphere and the context of what's really going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, I would think that some of it's just everyone's identified who's the in-group and who's the out-group, and journalists are definitely part of the out-group.
Well, the ones they don't like are, you know, they love Project Veritas, and I just
would think that they, in their mind, don't even think of them as journalists. You know, like how Trump would be like, you know, I'm not a politician. Like, you're the fucking president, dude. Of course you are.
Right.
But you identify politicians as the bad group, and you don't want to put yourself in the bad group. So, you know, these things, they don't have fixed definition. I mean, I don't know. I would say to them, but also to anyone, you know, like all of us have kind of floating definitions of a lot of these things. And we, you know, tailor them to whether or not we like the person, right?
Right.
So I think some of it's just journalists who I define as, you know, I mean, like, yeah, right-wing people never, like Fox News is not, whenever they decry mainstream media bias, of course they're not talking about the largest cable network in the country. You know, so, yeah, so journalists, as they define it, are, you know, people who are not helping us. And we're just here to, you know, for the people who want to do it. So, you know, you guys stay out, right?
Right. Yeah, they featured one of the folks at Project Veritas, and he was proudly talking about on stage how he duped these Democratic advisors and people, and they had released this whole documentary about it, and how he had infiltrated them. And in fact, I would describe it as almost entrapment, because what he was describing was coming up with this illegal plot and suggesting it to these people, and then helping them, you know, make it happen, and even wiring them bunches of money. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting in the audience listening to this, like nodding along and like occasionally clapping, but just shocked that they would go to those lengths and then at the very least not respect transparent journalists' attempts to try and cover what's going on. So I think, yeah, there's a wide gulf in terms of what they would define as real media, and then the rest of it being fake news.
Yeah.
And you touched on something regarding some of these people seemed like almost decent people. And I think that's pretty common whenever you talk to these people. But it's very hard to imagine because their ideas are so repulsive and they're so out there that you can't wrap your head around any decent person believing them. And TC touched on it with the community thing. To me, a lot of it feels like people who might not have been that curious about the world like 5 to 10 years ago, and might not have been that politically active. Like we talked about the Jeffrey Epstein situation 7-8 years ago. That's like a thing. There is human trafficking. Like there is an actual global issue, and a lot of it probably does filter through very powerful, wealthy, mostly men, not all men. And it's like that small thing, the Epstein thing, was such an accelerant to this entire situation. Right. And I think a lot of that stuff is true. So then people who had never really learned much about the world before, maybe even before Trump, just were served up this perfect, you know, buffet that was like, oh, but everyone kind of thinks this Epstein thing is real. And then they just lost it and lost any ability to think critically about any of it.
Right. I think that's right. You know, they took something that had some basis in reality, and then they just take it to the moon. You know, they go off the deep end, and that is very attractive to, like you're saying, people who don't have any sort of systemic understanding of the world, or they don't approach politics through a lens that might help them understand things like institutionally. They're drawn to these concepts of, oh, if only these bad people were taken care of and gotten rid of, then the world would be a better place. And that's a very attractive conspiracy theory formula. You know, the Illuminati or whatever, you know, all of these sorts of threads came up. And it does a disservice to anyone who's trying to earnestly understand what happened with someone like Epstein and the whole situation there. I mean, those are very powerful people. They did some obviously very messed up stuff, and it's hard to exaggerate how messed up it was. And it's very disturbing to see all these connections with all these other powerful people. But I think serious people do have to kind of pump the brakes and, you know, not go far off the deep end when they're comprehending these things. Like, if we don't know exactly what happened, we can't claim to know that there's, you know, some satanic cabal that's harvesting adrenochrome. And I think this makes me think of something else that happened at the conference, which is incredible. You know, there was a podcast that was started by some really left-leaning people after all the Epstein stuff first came out. And it's called True Anon, and that's ironic.
Yeah.
And one of the hosts of that podcast was at the conference and had successfully convinced them to give him a full access press pass, which is incredible because he basically like Sacha Baron Cohen them the whole time. He wore the hat and had, you know, his moments of taking selfies with Flynn and so on and so forth. But if you actually listen to their podcast, they're not
They're communists.
No, Brace Belden, he actually fought in with the YGP against ISIS.
Yeah.
So that's the irony and the absurdity of them somehow getting goofed on by an actual communist while they're talking about this like secret communist cabal that's taking over the world was it fried my fucking mind. S level rank on that sneaking mission for him. And
Do you know he went to a school?
What?
He went to a therapeutic boarding school for high-risk adolescents.
You did?
No, Brace.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And we haven't had time on this podcast, I don't believe, to dive into all of the Synanon stuff, but he went to an actual like Synanon school.
I didn't know that about him. I had met him briefly in San Francisco when I was living there.
Nice.
And had kept in touch with him a little bit. So whenever I saw that he was here, I was like texting him, like, how the hell did you do this?
Yeah.
And that was amazing. And it also illustrated to me that, in addition to my experience, that these folks, for all of their complaints about, allegedly being fucked over by some, international intelligence operation to try and entrap them, that they literally got goofed on by like an amateur intelligence operation. I can't wait to see the footage and the audio and stuff that they were able to collect. Because he was goofing around with the guy from All Gas No Breaks too. He was there. He has his own thing now. It's called Channel 5 since he severed ties with the folks that own the brand and the rights.
Yeah, that was an
interesting
All Gas No Breaks. There was a New York Times article. I'm sure you read it. It was good. I was interested.
Mm-hmm. So
watch out for contracts, folks. They're bad.
The takeaway that I had from all of this is there is a lot of fucked up stuff going on in the world, right? There's a lot of bad things, and a lot of people are upset about them, and they can latch on to like a sliver of truth, and then be pushed down this path and drawn down this like interactive conspiracy theory path that promises them some sort of awakening or enlightenment, and that's like very religious dispensationalist sort of thinking. And there was a ton of overlap in the speakers with that sort of thinking, and then explicitly sort of Christian dominionist, or I would even call it like Christian fascist thinking, where they're saying God-fearing and God-loving patriots should have total control over the government and finance and media. And they're not even trying to veil that. They're saying the quiet part out loud. And I'm just sitting there, thinking that's an interesting take. I didn't necessarily expect that here, but a lot of people seem to really react to it, and it dovetails with the for God and country and all of that sort of rhetoric that is par for the course for a lot of conservative movements. But then it gets paired along with these totally other unhinged ideas that. We've got, our chairman of the Republican Party here and our agricultural commissioner rubbing shoulders with them and, openly embracing these
Do you think
ideas.
those people, like the people who are in actual political, like institutional roles, do you think they actually believe the crazier parts?
I don't think it fucking matters, to be honest. I tweeted this a little bit, but like Schopenhauer, he's a philosopher, he's a dead guy, but he basically argued it doesn't matter what our intentions are because no one can actually know what anyone's intentions are. What matters is your actions and the results of those actions and the pattern. And so it doesn't matter if they're true believers or just grifters. They're embracing this stuff. They're amplifying it. They're not pushing it away. They're not denying it. And sometimes they'll say, well, yeah, maybe I don't 100% believe the idea that Hillary Clinton is a pedophile that's harvesting adrenochrome, but they'll still leave room for that possibility. And so
I don't get the sense at all that Flynn's some like cagey operator with like playing some complicated game. I kind of think that he does just believe all this shit.
It's possible. I just don't think it fucking matters. Yeah, they could also just be doing it for the grift. They could be doing it because they need money or that they've become disgraced. Or, worst case scenario, they're doing it because they really want a military coup. They're doing it because they really want to overturn the government and get these people back in power. A lot of people never learn about this thing that happened in the United States in 1933, but there was a really highly decorated Marine named Smedley Butler who was approached by a group of businessmen, and they basically were trying to get him to get in on like a military coup in the United States. It was called the Business Plot. And Smedley Butler ended up going on to be a big anti-war activist. He wrote a book called War is a Racket, and he was a part of what was called the Bonus Army movement, where it was like a precursor to Occupy. Quite literally, a bunch of veterans and their families camped out in front of the White House and were like, hey, we need some assistance because we're all fucked up and traumatized, and, we're not capable of sustaining ourselves during the midst of the Great Depression and stuff. And they were run off by the police, and they were run off by the military as well. And so the reason I bring that up is, this wouldn't be the first time that some people had openly considered doing this sort of thing in the United States. It's just that back then they picked the wrong guy. Now General Flynn is like the foil of that. He's, working with this movement. He's embraced it. The people at this convention would refer to him as the general. And then, there's portraits of him, his face superimposed on, portraits of the founding fathers and Revolutionary War era battles and stuff. And that's not subtext, right? That's context. That's not an undertone. That's loud and clear. And even if it's just a grift, or even if it's all for fun or ironic or whatever, it's like, well, we just had something like this happen in January 6th, then you could perceive that as a dry run, especially whenever they're, continuing to openly embrace this idea of like a Myanmar-style coup, which more informed researchers than me have pointed to the fact that since that happened, that's been like an object of envy on QAnon forums.
That's wild.
Right, yeah, because the narrative there with the Myanmar coup, if you're unfamiliar with it, is that the military was like, well, there are some weird election irregularities that outside observers didn't really support, and then they just decided to, do a coup. It's not to say that the party who won or their prime minister who whatever is spotless and doesn't have some issues that they have dealt with in the past, but it was the deposing of a democratic election. And so that dovetails exactly with the Stop the Steal stuff. We had a rally in Dallas last year. It was a Stop the Steal rally. We Are the Storm was featured in all of the advertising, and that is a direct reference to a Q thing. They say that all the time, We Are the Storm. Alan West had spoken at stuff like that. He was at the QAnon conference. There are other local political groups in the area that have also featured people who were speaking at the QAnon conference. And they've hosted other conspiracy theory groups. And they've also hosted city council debates. So this stuff, it's like not just in this like national space somewhere else. It's also in our backyard.
I worry very much about the school board thing.
That's also a threat.
Because even where I live, and I know there's, in South Lake, a couple of them won, in Grapevine, Colleyville, where I live, there's a lady who's probably going to win, and she's full on Q.
Right.
And those people end up with a lot of influence, obviously, over education. Like, we're having to fight a battle right now over the boogeyman of critical race theory that doesn't even really exist.
I mean,
so if you don't think that they wouldn't try to put some Q elements into curriculum, that seems inevitable to me if this continues, and I don't see how it doesn't.
I don't think that they have like a
cohesive narrative.
Yeah, like what exactly are you going to teach?
Well, as I joke to you, I think by like 2040, or maybe I used it whenever Izzy and Nora, by the time they're in high school, any mention of like major celebrities of the 21st century will be notated as pedophiles, not as entertainers. So if like you have any reason to mention like Bono, he will not be a humanitarian and an artist. He will be a famed pedophile. And obviously that's extreme, and then something else I was going to mention was I almost feel bad that I think I take this less seriously because it's so bumbling. Because it's obviously very dangerous. It's obviously going to have local impact. Obviously, they actually did attempt some level of an insurrection. But the fact that, and no offense, that you got in and that other people were able to. And that's not an uncommon thing throughout this narrative. Like, they're just so bad at everything. And I think that lulls people who actually care about this stuff into a false sense of like, this is just a sideshow load of bullshit.
Sure.
Is it false?
Sure. So I think both of these things can be true simultaneously, though. I think they can be incompetent, obviously, in certain ways that are demonstrated and can appear bumbling and ridiculous and absurd. But on the other hand, there's money behind this. There's fire behind the smoke. So to not take it seriously just because of how ridiculous it seems at face value, I think would be a mistake, because we could, probably point to some analogies historically of stuff that people maybe thought, oh, those people aren't very competent. Wasn't the beer hall putsch a total failure? And then what happened?
Yeah. No, I mean, Donald Trump's presidential campaign springs to mind.
Right. Right. It's less so about, these like specific instances of incompetence and more about what weight is being put behind this. And when we've got the chairman of the Republican Party, we've got elected officials like Louis Gohmert, we've got, the agricultural commissioner, we've got, big money pouring into these school board races. We've got these like shadowy groups in local politics like Keep Dallas Safe, pushing similar, narratives about, security and stuff. They're not necessarily Q affiliated, but they're a part of like this, thread of things that are going on where, they're trying to influence what's going on locally. And so I think we have to kind of do both. We can laugh about how silly it all seems, but we don't want to get goofed on by that, do you? Like, wouldn't that be embarrassing and awful if this movement actually had an impact, which, to your point about school board races, they already are. They are having an impact. And that some of that may be reversible, but it's happening all the same.
So I have not watched any of the stream speeches or anything like that. How much does someone like Louis Gohmert, like, is he just getting up there and giving a normal Louis Gohmert political speech, or is he going up there and being like, you guys, I've been reading all this stuff on 8chan. I think that fucking Chrissy Teigen is a pedophile.
Yeah, I don't think he went like full on mask off, but I think they occasionally would do this wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of thing. And then, I think the most important thing is that they're not stupid. They're not deaf. They know, if they don't know who they're surrounding themselves with and who they're rubbing shoulders with, well, that's also a sign of their incompetence. But they seem very eager to stand on the same stage as people who are talking about adrenochrome, who are talking about, the threat of witchcraft and so on and so forth in our country.
Well, let's not underrate that.
You always have to be careful.
Yeah,
I try
witchcraft.
Yeah, you don't want to piss off the Wiccans.
Yeah.
But, jokes aside.
I hear they tried to hex the moon.
Yo, gotta go.
I mean, we're going to find out.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think, all jokes aside, the pattern of behavior is disturbing. And I think we have to also recognize that this movement isn't all batshit crazy stuff, or I don't even like to use the word crazy. It's not all wackadoo stuff. It is a mix of wackadoo stuff with stuff that is pretty par for the course, which is concerning because it means that there are ostensibly serious people who are seemingly relying on those sorts of ideas to continue the advance of whatever they want. And if we don't really know what they want at the end of the day, well, that's concerning. It's very, very concerning to me that, we're going to have to deal with people who are in political office at the statewide level in Texas just looking the other way about this. Making it alive and well. Texas is in many ways like the most active part of the country when it comes to some of this QAnon stuff, or like the January 6th stuff, as some of the articles have dug into. And there was another organization in the past that used to, call Texas their home in terms of having the most active stuff. And they used to wear some pretty funny outfits and say some pretty wackadoo stuff, but they also committed terrorism and hate crimes. And something that people do need to appreciate, and it sounds like your listeners might appreciate this, is that there's a long list of, really fucked up stuff that fervent Q adherents have done, whether it was, the Comet Ping Pong thing or kidnappings or other forms of like what you could, describe as stochastic terrorism. There's an instance of the wildfires in Washington and Q boards and stuff pushing this idea that, oh, no, it was actually Antifa thugs that were setting fire to these areas and then they're going to come and loot all the houses. And there would be people who took that seriously and stayed in spite of the fire coming. And then the fire departments were like, this is a whole cesspool. Like Facebook, don't get on Facebook. Like listen to the fucking fire department. And so whether it's people falling for that stuff or actively going out of their way to do things that are, dangerous, that's not every person that believes in this stuff, but it's enough people to have to ask ourselves, like, what's in this Kool-Aid?
Just from a demographic standpoint, both from a racial and from a age group, what sort of representation are we talking about? Because to me, and this is probably not only myopic, but also ageist, I don't think I could fall for something like this because I grew up on the internet. I think I have some level of scrupulousness to where when I see certain things, I'm like, well, that's obviously, but then even my parents who are not on this path at all, they will like ask me about things that they saw on the internet. And they're like, hey, do you know anything about this? I'm like, listen, thank you for asking. So I wonder like if there's like a cutoff, is it people who just didn't really have the internet and don't really have the literacy for it? Like what age are we talking? How many people were there, would you say, that were like our age, like 35 and under type?
Very few. I was definitely one of the younger people there. That was another reason I was concerned I would stand out. The demographics were, all the people that were there, I'd say the vast majority of them were over 40. There was majority boomers, I would say, people who were around my parents' age, and then a chunk of Gen X representation as well. Not a ton of like millennials, not a ton of people under 35. Definitely no Zoomers were there voluntarily, unless they had been, brought by their parents. There were like a couple young kids who had been brought by their parents. But I think, there's a number. Yeah, that's tough, right? There's a number of reasons I think that was the case, at least at this event, because one, if you just look at the statistics for which generations have the most wealth in this country, like boomers are holding on to it real tight. Millennials don't really have a bunch of extra cash right now, and so paying $500 to $1,000 just to get a ticket, not even including the hotel or the flight or the food or any of these other things, not even to mention the thousands of dollars people were spending on at that ridiculous auction. It was people who seemed financially comfortable, maybe a lot of empty nesters, some Gen Xers. Maybe they didn't grow up with the internet as much as I did or y'all did. But it skewed older. But I don't want to emphasize that too much, because it's not to say that there aren't some younger people who have gotten involved in this or believe in it.
Yeah, I wonder how much like the fact is a $500, like if you just had a room full of, like if you somehow, there was no barrier for money. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know that I would take this as like disproving the idea that this is something that is, at least just as likely, if not more likely, to infect the mind of a, person who is lower status.
Yeah, the reason I don't know is because one, because of the digital literacy thing, but two, this doesn't sound to me like all that much economic anxiety.
None at all.
And so if you're talking about people who are 27, 28, and they're like, shit, I got all this student debt, that sort of thing, that's been like sort of the hypothesis of how you could pick somebody off. But if most of the people there are super wealthy, or not super wealthy, but, financially stable, then to me, that does speak to that a little bit. And also the fact that I've just never actually met anybody who was around my age who was into this.
Right.
I know they exist, but I've
right.
never.
Yeah, I don't doubt their existence, but I think it's shown a light on who's really kind of funding the movement and who's really, putting their money where their mouth is. Anyone can go on 8chan or 8kun and whatever and follow this stuff. And a lot of people who tend to use those websites do skew younger. And, they might be extremists as well. I mean, hey, the folks that run that really messed up neo-Nazi group, Patriot Front, a lot of them are very young. So it's not to say that young people can't be involved in something like this or aren't supportive of it. But yeah, the people who seem to be most behind it and willing to, pay money to be there are the older folks. I did sit across the table from a guy who seemed about my age, and he had driven up from Austin, and he was, talking about communist global cabals and how we'd all be able to colonize the moon and Mars if they just didn't exist. But he was the exception.
A thing I've clearly always wanted, so I'm really upset that I don't have it.
Yeah, for sure. I guess you're just gonna have to wait for the storm. But the economic anxiety part, I think, it's a kind of a false narrative. It makes sense somewhat historically. Yeah, fascism rose in the past during times when there were a lot of unemployed young men with a lot of extra energy. And, if someone could give them 3 hots and a cot and an outfit, they were, on board, right? And there's a lot of nationalism involved in that. I don't know if it's necessarily the same as what's going on here. I mean, there are other movements and other things that are more obviously youth-led, or I don't want to say youth-led necessarily, but predominantly younger, skewing younger. And so this did not appear to be that in any way. And I think there's been some recent research that validates the idea that it's a bit of a prevailing but false notion, and that the narratives that were dominant at this convention, they really didn't have much to do with money or financial hardship. They had everything to do with culture and social status and the risk that that's being taken away and being replaced by a culture that they seem to find to be alien or abhorrent. And so I think it's very much about people having this entitled sense of their current social status, or this perceived notion of what it really means to be an American, and then looking around at people in our generation who don't really share the same values as a lot of these people, and becoming very scared. Very scared. I mean, one person went on about how they were just upset to see RuPaul in drag on an Old Navy commercial, as if that was just the most criminal, abhorrent thing they'd ever seen. And it's well, you can change the channel, you can turn it off. Yeah. What are you so afraid of? And so I would say it's more so that, and that's not new. We've been dealing with that for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, there has been I think that over the course of the last 20 years, they've gone, people who find RuPaul and Old Navy ads abhorrent have gone from obviously being in the majority position healthily to a minority position now. And so I wonder how much, I mean, it's not like Q centers that stuff, so it would make more sense as a thesis if Q was all about how transgendered people are terrible. But I have no doubt that person's lived experience has been challenging for that, the George Bush, the 2004 George Bush re-election, whenever he's running on, I'm going to put all these gay marriage initiatives on state ballots so that I can, because I know it's such a popular issue, that it'll get my voters out, to now it being you're really ostracized pretty quickly if you say that you don't think that gay people should be able to get married. 2004 is very easy for me to remember. It was not very long ago.
Right.
And, they were on top of the world then. And, it would be you could get fired from your job for saying that shit now.
Right. And I think they're reacting to how quickly that has changed. And it's not just that issue. There's a number of issues. I think it's just generally any sort of progressive social change or economic change.
And I want to be clear, I think it's good that you can be fired from your job for it. I was saying that in a kind of
right. I mean, hey, it's kind of, there's consequences to being a bigot.
Yeah.
And, I think we should, always be careful whenever we're employing words like bigot or we're calling someone a fascist, because those words have meaning, and to water them down or use them too loosely reduces the meaning that they have and the edge that they're supposed to have. And I would describe a lot of these people as, sometimes open bigots, not always, and sometimes open fascists, not always. And so if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck and it looks like a duck, you might as well use those words. And yeah, they really do fixate on this notion that not only is the culture changing and that their children are being brainwashed, but that there's this, big hidden enemy, this big, deep hidden enemy that only they understand the threat of and the truth of. And it justifies some of the ideas in their mind of, okay, well now, the military is the only way, is the big, saying that was literally cribbed from a Q post and then was put on a slide on stage right before that Michael Flynn Q&A where he was talking about Myanmar. Like, that's the importance of the context here.
Yeah.
They feel justified in that, we've exhausted all of our legitimate options at this point. And so it is unsettling because, when that becomes normalized, people start to really openly consider, overturning elections and looking forward to the next one and doing everything they can to make it so that they will win or prevail. And if they don't, that they will have some of these other ideas in mind. And it doesn't help that, over the past 4 or 8 years, we've seen an increasing embrace of some in the, normal Republican Party, I'm using air quotes here, of basically describing anytime they lose something big, that's fraudulent. That's not real. It feeds right into this paranoia and this logic that justifies, breaking rules and, doing dangerous things.
Did they allow guns?
Sorry, go ahead.
What, go ahead.
Did they allow guns?
I didn't see that. That wasn't something common at the event. That wasn't something that I noticed. So I felt safe in that regard.
All the people who need we need the guns for on the outside, dude.
I guess that's true. As far as the auction goes, were there any swords?
No, there were bats.
Bats.
They were bats that Michael
like the
Flynn,
rodent or like baseball?
Like baseball.
Okay.
Yeah. Like these kind of custom made looking bats. I remember Michael Flynn held one up and he said, me and my wife, we like to call this one the Department of Just Us. And he had signed it and one of them had been engraved. Yeah, about a bat.
I don't even really get it.
Yeah, I don't get it either, but it sold for $8,000. So, fuck, whatever, man. The most absurd one was a very shoddily made Q-themed quilt.
I saw that picture.
That also had like a Blue Lives Matter sort of vibe to it.
Hell yeah.
And hell yeah. People who do quilting were insulted that I described it as a quilt. But it's a Q-ilt, so it was just too easy to call it that. And that one sold for $6,500. The portraits sold for thousands of dollars each, and I would describe those as like kitschy fan art that someone's going to hang in their home or office. And
I was looking at what it would take to get some Ben Garrison art for my house, and he does charge a lot. I was surprised.
Right, yeah, it's like that level of artistic value. If you're a true believer, if you want to, be able to show it off to all your friends whenever you, gather and burn your masks like they did here in, Collin County several months ago, which I bring that up because one of the speakers at that event, it was hosted by this organization called the Dallas Jewish Conservatives. His name was Evan Sayet. He spoke at the QAnon conference. He's now going to be featured as a guest at an event hosted by the Dallas Jewish Conservatives this weekend. At that event, the host of the party described COVID precautions in Australia and New Zealand to me as quote unquote fucking concentration camps. So I don't understand how an organization that calls itself Jewish will continue to operate not only with someone like that as a patron, and they haven't done anything to, publicly, distance themselves or condemn those comments, but to continue to overlap with these people who are playing a dangerous game, because it's not only Evan Sayet. They've featured Alan West, they featured Sid Miller, the agricultural commissioner, as well as 2 other pretty wild conspiracy theory people in the past. And that's the group that I was referring to earlier. They hosted a city council debate with only select people, and they raised money and they, donated them to their campaigns. They were all pretty conservative candidates and pretty pro-police people.
Yeah, it was all the worst ones. I saw the list.
Yeah.
It was fairly comprehensive.
So, yeah, I mentioned that just
It
because...
was reassuring about how many of them that...
They lost.
Yeah, Karen Mendelsohn is on the council now.
Right.
But I mean, I would have been able to tell you that she doesn't have a lot of good ideas going around in her head.
She doesn't seem like someone, though, that would want to be associated with the QAnon movement.
I know. No, she's not out that far.
So
I don't think that she's trying to be.
Yeah, I bring that up because there are these attempts to kind of like launder these ideas, I think, into the mainstream or to traffic them into the mainstream. And we have to be diligent about that and identifying when that's actually happening. Because there are a lot of people with money willing to spend that money, whether it's at an auction or on some sort of dark money campaign to influence our school boards or our local elections. And it happens so quickly that it's very hard to understand what's happening while it's happening. It's usually only after the fact that we can like piece together, oh, okay, there's connections here and there's like something deeper going on. And so, where there's smoke, there's fire. And in this instance, even if the smoke is all ridiculously colored and we think it's absurd, there's some real firepower behind this stuff.
Where do you think it's headed?
Well, fuck, man. I hope it's headed straight to nowhere, personally.
It doesn't feel that way right now.
No, it doesn't. It's building momentum in a lot of ways. Some people would hope that after January 6th, when people got arrested and stuff, that, this would have weakened the movement, but it doesn't seem to have. It seems like it has solidified it in some ways and given some people more gas. So I think we just have to be very mindful and careful. I wish I knew what to fucking do about it, other than, describe it as accurately and truthfully as I can. I think it really just comes down to people organizing and pushing back if they don't like this sort of thing. Because they are fairly organized, at least in terms of, if we see the results of these school board elections and they win, they're out organizing and outmaneuvering other people. So I would say, we're probably going to see a period of time, if I had to look in my freaking crystal ball, where there's going to be some victories for this movement. And it's going to take a concerted effort to push back and stop that from getting too far. Because, you mentioned 2004 and all those state things with regard to gay marriage. And there was a period of time when I was in college, I was like, we're going backwards, y'all. Like, this is not progress. This is scary, like my home state included. And then, thankfully at the time, the Supreme Court came down and said, oh, nope, sorry. It's nationally allowed now. And so I think we're probably going to see a bit of, revanchism on their part and some victories there. But because there's really no arc of history, in my opinion, it's a matter of doing the work and making it happen. So I'm hopeful that after this weekend, perhaps more people will understand what this is and will get involved in some way to, at the very least, boost the folks, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, who are openly saying, this ain't it, Chief. Because, it doesn't just have to be Democrats or people on the left. There can be plenty of conservatives who look at this and say, I don't want anything to do with this.
That's a calculated gamble, though.
Yes, it is. And we need to look at those people and respect them, even if you don't like them. Respect them when they do it. I don't think we should necessarily cheerlead too much and always amplify them crazily if we can avoid it. But at the same time, it's going to take a team effort for us to tamp down on this, because otherwise, the pro-Trump and blatantly conspiratorial elements of this party will hijack it and run it off the road, and then we're going to all have to deal with the mess.
It's very tough to match the passion of people who literally believe that their political aims are preventing their daughters from having adrenaline sucked from their neck.
Right.
Yeah, I would do a lot to prevent that.
Yeah, if you really believe that. And then on the other side, you're expected to simply only be as passionate about making sure that person doesn't win. They have a very interesting calculation of how to rile people up and then make their opponents be like, it wasn't even written about in the morning news in a way that was accurate, because I guarantee you the morning news doesn't want to.
They did have an editorial that came out after the Flynn thing went viral, and they said, bad things happen basically when lies go unchallenged. And I was like, oh, really?
Well, people should challenge the morning news much more often.
Well, I said this is how it started and how it's going. It's almost like they didn't do that on Friday, and then the whiplash came, and then they realized the mistake that they made. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit. Maybe I'm being too critical, but I think, that's a perfect example of whenever we're not paying attention and we take what they say at face value too much. And I don't mean like, the Myanmar comment, like take that at face value, because there's a lot of context that justifies that. I'm saying like whenever they just say, oh, this is because we want fellowship and we love God and we love Trump. I mean, like those things are all true, but that's not really what it's all about at the end of the day. That's just a tip of the iceberg in terms of the substance of what went on at that conference.
So I think we're wrapping up here, but I have things that I do feel like I can't leave without finding out from someone who was there. Just whenever you're talking to people and asking them like what are you excited about seeing, that's so weird to me because I don't know, a very short time ago I thought that we had broad consensus across all kinds of viewpoints that this shit sucks and is boring.
Like conferences?
Yeah, like, if Ted Nugent's going to be there, all right, I get it. But fucking, this is just like a retired general speaking. Like, whenever you look in their eyes and they say, I'm really excited to hear the ag commissioner, like, do you think that they believe that? Like, how do we contend with the fact that this has become like something that's close to the center of entertainment when it's clearly not entertaining?
It's kind of like church, I would say, for some of these people. It's like they have this set of beliefs, they become zealot-like in their beliefs, and it gives them a sense of meaning, and it gives them a sense of purpose and direction. Believe, trust in the plan. That sort of stuff is a very common refrain. And that wasn't just my takeaway. People that had made it inside as observers and non-believers also would describe it as it's kind of like a church-like environment where people are getting really riled up, and there's a lot of language that is either explicitly religious or kind of ties into the notions of you have to do your own research and believe it, and then you'll come to the truth and you'll be awakened. And so I think it's not just like entertainment. It's much more for some of these people who get sucked into it. And there's a lot of reasons people might get sucked into that. They could have like an addictive personality. They may just not have a passion in life, or they may not have something that they believe in. They may be looking for guidance, and they get sucked in. And then this is what happens. I mean, I'm not a researcher, an expert on cults in any way, but a lot of people can get wrapped up in those things, and they can start to believe really strange things, and they can give away all their resources. They can go and find things interesting that we have no understanding of why it is. So, I think we have to treat it like something that is not necessarily a matter of logic. It's not something that we can logic our way out of. It's like a deeply held belief that may be, unchallengeable. It's not like a hypothesis that we can test necessarily, because many of their predictions and hypotheses have been tested and not come true and not come to light, and yet they persist.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I grew up Catholic. We don't get excited for church. We don't do all that clapping and bullshit. So.
Yeah, this would be more like a mega church
vibe. This is foreign to me.
This is like a tent revival type of situation.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's a good analogy.
They should get snakes.
Yeah. Oh, I meant to provide space for a plug for the magazine at the top, because now the people that got bored halfway through aren't going to be here, but I forgot. So
no worries.
I do want to provide space for the magazine.
Oh yeah. So so just edit this in or whatever anywhere. I'm a freelance journalist here in Dallas. Work independently, and I end up publishing my stuff in a couple of different publications here. I've been in D Magazine once, The Observer, The Weekly, and others, as well as a national outlet. But my other thing is I'm a publisher of a independent magazine. It's a collective of us. We're distributed nationally, but I'm here in Dallas, and it's called Protean Magazine. And it's not a news publication. We publish essays, a lot of poetry, and occasionally some fiction. And it's definitely a passion project for me, but it's something that I found really fulfilling. And so if you're looking for something a little different and you're interested in any of the things that we talked about today, we've published a really great interview with a man named Shane Burley. He's a writer and a journalist, and he's written about extremism and fascism, and we did get into talking about QAnon a bit in that interview. So go check that out if you would like to get a bit even more of an informed perspective on some of the roots of this stuff, and a really great analysis of the various threads that make up this quilt of beliefs. And we're
It's
a nonprofit.
not really a quilt.
Yeah, it's not really a quilt. Sorry. It's
The best part
more
about
of a
this
duvet
is
cover.
that you infiltrating this conference, your reporting might have drawn the most ire from Quilt Twitter.
It really did. I definitely touched a nerve in Quilt Twitter. I want to extend my deepest apologies to Quilt Twitter. I'm a fan of quilts. I have nothing against them. And, if you would like to educate me on what I should have called that abomination, my DMs are open.
Yeah, and as a result of this whole thing, you got to go on CNN. So I didn't know. Does the magazine now come with like a as featured on CNN sticker?
No, I don't think CNN needs any more, reason for people to call them the Communist News Network. I'm joking. It was cool to be able to have that on the Chiron for like 5 minutes because, we're a ragtag, scrappy group. We're not that old. We've only put out 2 print editions, and we only publish a few things a week. But we try to do everything with care, and we have 0 advertising. So the only way we do it is through people chipping in a few bucks every month so that we can pay people to do the work. So check us out. We have a Patreon, proteanmag.com, and you'll be able to find everything that you want there. And, maybe they'll bring me back on CNN because I didn't say anything mean about Cuomo yet. I wanted to make a joke about Tucker Carlson too, but I just got too serious and focused. So I'll have to put those in my back pocket for next time.
All right, man. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. The high school special is next, so until tomorrow, for everyone who's been a part of this one,
I'm TC and Jake.
we do thank you for watching. Good night.